This is my true story. I worked my whole life saving for retirement, thinking my family would respect what I built. My grandson always said I inspired him, that I taught him hard work and patience. But one morning, I checked my bank account and saw numbers that didn't make sense. My balance was gone. Every cent I had saved was transferred into something called his investment project. He thought I wouldn't notice. He thought I was too old to understand. But I wasn't helpless. I was just quiet, until I turned his dream into his worst nightmare. Before I tell you, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. My grandson came to visit me in Oklahoma last spring. The sky was clear that day, and I remember thinking how grown up he looked when he pulled up in that new truck. He talked fast, full of excitement, telling me he had found an opportunity that would change everything. He said it was a small business deal, some kind of investment that needed a quick transfer of funds. He promised it was safe, only for a few days, and that I'd get everything back, plus a little profit. I didn't understand all the terms he used, but he sounded confident, like he knew exactly what he was doing. He said his friends were already in on it, and that he just needed someone to help him move money faster. He told me it would help both of us, that it was my chance to grow the savings I'd worked decades for. I looked at him and saw the same kid I once took fishing, the same little boy who used to run around my yard barefoot. I wanted to believe he was being honest. When you love someone that much, you don't expect betrayal. You just want to trust. So when he asked if he could use my bank account, I said yes. I didn't even hesitate. I thought I was helping him, like grandparents always do. He said it was temporary, maybe a week or two. He'd deposit the money, move it around, and then send it right back with interest. I remember sitting at the table while he explained how the market worked, showing me things on his phone I didn't understand. It looked complicated, but he seemed so sure. I didn't ask too many questions. I didn't want to make him feel like I didn't trust him. That was my mistake. The next morning, he set everything up on his laptop while I made breakfast. He said he'd handle the transfers himself so I wouldn't have to worry. I gave him permission to access my online account, something I'd never done with anyone before. He smiled, hugged me, and said I'd be proud of him soon. I believed every word. Over the next few days, he stayed busy. Calls, messages, charts on his screen. He said things were moving fast and that it was a good sign. I didn't understand it all, but I tried to be supportive. I even made him dinner and told him I was proud he was doing something ambitious. He smiled, but it wasn't the same smile I remembered. There was something distant in it, something I didn't notice until later. Before he left, he promised everything was going well and that he'd update me soon. He said not to worry if the balance looked lower for a few days. It was all part of the process. I didn't think much of it. He had always been good with technology, and I wasn't, so I trusted his word and let it go. He gave me a hug, said he'd be back next week, and drove away. That was the last time I saw him for a while. Days passed, then a week, then another. I didn't check the account at first. I assumed everything was fine. I told my neighbor about him, even bragged a little that my grandson was building something important. It made me proud, until the day I logged into my account and saw the balance. The numbers didn't make sense. There were transfers, withdrawals, and accounts I didn't recognize. I stared at the screen for a long time, thinking maybe there was a mistake. But deep down, I already knew. The trust I gave had been turned into a tool. The opportunity he promised wasn't for us. It was only for him. That was the moment everything changed. I realized trust can be the most dangerous investment of all when it's placed in the wrong hands. I wasn't angry yet, but something inside me went cold. I had spent a lifetime teaching that boy honesty and respect, and now I was about to teach him something else. It started small. A few days after he left, my phone buzzed with text alerts from the bank, messages about transactions and transfers I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was a system glitch. Then the emails started coming in, receipts and confirmations with names I'd never seen before. I called the bank, but the representative said everything looked authorized. I didn't understand how that could be true. My heart sank as I logged into my online account and saw the balance. Almost everything I had saved over 40 years, gone. The number on the screen didn't even seem real. I sat there staring at it, thinking maybe I'd typed something wrong. I refreshed the page twice, then 3 times, but it didn't change. The savings I had built with every paycheck, every long shift, every missed vacation, all of it was gone in seconds. I went to the kitchen, sat down at the same table where he once ate breakfast as a kid, and opened my old checkbook. I tried to match the numbers, but none of them lined up. It was all gone. The emergency fund, the retirement money, even the little bit I'd put aside for repairs around the house. My hands shook so hard I had to put the papers down. I couldn't even think straight. It wasn't just the money that hurt. It was the trust. I had trusted him with everything. I believed in him. And now, he had taken what I'd worked my whole life for, without a word, without shame. The next morning, I went to the bank in person. The teller looked uncomfortable as she pulled up the account history. She showed me transactions that led to other accounts, all under my grandson's name. He had set up transfers, withdrawals, and even changed some contact information to keep me from seeing alerts right away. He knew exactly what he was doing. The teller asked if I wanted to file a fraud report, but the word fraud felt wrong. This wasn't a stranger. This was my blood, my family, my grandson. I just told her I needed printed copies of everything. I drove home slowly, the papers in the passenger seat beside me. Every stoplight felt longer than usual. The car felt too quiet. When I got home, I placed the statements on the kitchen table and stared at them. I could see every dollar leaving my account, one line after another. I traced the dates with my finger. I remembered what I was doing on each of those days: cooking, cleaning, watching TV, thinking life was calm. And all that time, he was draining me dry behind a screen. For the rest of that week, I barely slept. Every night, I'd wake up thinking maybe he'd call, maybe he'd explain. But the phone never rang. I checked his social media, and that's when it really hit me. He was posting pictures, smiling, standing next to a new car, flashing fancy clothes, bragging about being an entrepreneur. He had taken my money and turned it into a show. The comments were full of people congratulating him. They called him inspiring. I sat there staring at the screen, reading those words over and over, my chest tightening. I thought about everything I taught him growing up: to work for what you earn, to take care of family, to never take shortcuts. I realized those lessons hadn't disappeared. He'd just buried them under greed. I wasn't sure whether to feel anger or heartbreak. In that moment, both felt the same. The house was quiet, but my mind was loud. Memories, numbers, questions, all crashing together. That was the first time in my life I felt old. Not because of my age, but because of how powerless I suddenly seemed. But something inside me whispered that it wasn't over. I didn't raise a fool, and I wasn't about to die one. I'd lost money before, but never to someone I loved. This time, I wasn't going to call the bank or shout into a phone. I was going to take back everything, slowly, carefully, and completely. I sat in my living room that night with the lights off, the house quiet except for the old clock ticking on the wall. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, not as the man he'd become, but as the little boy who used to run barefoot through my yard, laughing. I remembered the days when I'd take him fishing at Lake Texoma, his small hands holding the rod while I showed him how to bait the hook. He used to tell me he wanted to grow up and be like me. Strong, honest, hard-working. I bought him his first tackle box when he turned 10. He kept it in his room like it was treasure. That boy used to call me his best friend. He'd sit on my porch swing, sipping lemonade, saying I was the smartest man he knew. Now, that same boy had grown into a man who emptied my life's savings without hesitation. I looked at the papers again, the numbers still burned into my mind. They weren't just numbers anymore. They were memories, turned into debts. Every dollar represented a piece of my past, every withdrawal a broken promise. I tried to understand where things had gone wrong. Maybe it started small. Little lies, small excuses, the belief that family forgiveness is automatic. Maybe he thought I'd never fight back because I loved him too much. He was wrong. I got up and walked into the hallway, looking at the framed photos still hanging there. There he was, smiling, holding the fish he caught at 11. another one from his high school graduation, another from his first car. Each photo felt like a piece of glass pressing against my heart. I thought about all the birthdays, all the holidays, all the moments I gave him what I never had growing up. Not because I expected anything back, but because I wanted him to have a better start. And now, that love had turned into a weapon he used against me. I remembered when his parents divorced. He stayed with me for a year back then. I paid for his school, bought his clothes, made his lunches, taught him to drive in the old pickup I still keep in the garage. He told me once, "You're the only one who never gave up on me." I believed him. I never imagined he'd grow up and give up on me instead. I looked at those photos and realized something I hadn't before. Betrayal hurts more when it wears a familiar face. The memories didn't bring comfort, they brought clarity. This wasn't about money anymore, it was about principle. I had worked for everything I owned, driving trucks across 40 states, sleeping in cabs, missing birthdays, pushing through winters just to make sure my family had more than I did. That money wasn't luck, it was sweat. It was years of sacrifice. And he took it like it was spare change. I walked to the back door and looked outside. The night air was still, the moon high over the Oklahoma hills. I thought about my wife, how she always told me that kindness can be dangerous if you give it to the wrong people. Maybe she had seen this coming long before I did. Maybe I didn't want to believe it. I had always thought family was safe. But standing there, I realized blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. It just makes the betrayal cut deeper. I went back inside and sat down again. The papers were still on the table, the numbers staring back. But now, I didn't feel weak anymore. I felt steady. The memories reminded me who I was. Not a victim, but a man who'd survived worse. I'd built a life from nothing once, and I could rebuild again. I might have been older, slower, and quieter, but I still had something my grandson didn't: experience. And that's what would save me. Because he thought he stole my money. What he really did was wake up the part of me that never loses. The next morning, I made myself coffee and sat at the kitchen table again, staring at the printed bank statements. The first wave of pain had already passed. What replaced it was focus. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I didn't call the police or the bank again. I knew that if I acted out of anger, I'd make mistakes. So I stayed quiet. I started taking notes in an old notebook, writing down every transaction, every date, every account number. I circled the names I didn't recognize and underlined the ones that looked familiar. It didn't take long before I saw a pattern. The same two companies kept showing up, both linked to small payment services used for investments. I knew nothing about that world, but I knew someone who did. I drove into town that afternoon. The sun was hot, and the road stretched quiet between the fields. I stopped by the same small office building where I used to pay utility bills. Inside, an old friend named Frank still worked there, a man who once helped me handle freight paperwork when I drove trucks. He didn't ask questions when I told him I needed help tracing some accounts. Within an hour, he pointed me toward the companies behind the transfers. They were both registered under my grandson's name. The shock I felt earlier turned into something colder. Resolve. I went home, pulled out an old box from my closet, and opened it on the floor. Inside were decades of papers, receipts, deeds, tax records, old bank letters, everything I had ever kept. My wife used to joke that I never threw anything away. She was right, and this time it worked in my favor. I found every document tied to my savings, every proof of ownership. He might have stolen the money, but I still had the paper trail. I knew I could prove every cent was mine. That was the beginning of my plan. I called the bank again, not to complain, but to ask for statements dating back 6 months. I requested official documentation for every transfer. The lady on the phone sounded confused, but agreed. I knew I needed everything clean and complete. No guessing, no emotion, just facts. I even made copies of my driver's license, my account registration, and my online login history. Piece by piece, I was rebuilding my defense. When the envelope from the bank arrived 3 days later, I opened it carefully. Inside were pages of printed statements, each showing where the money had gone. The final page listed the destination, an investment account under my grandson's name, with my bank listed as the funding source. That was enough. He had linked his greed directly to my account. I sat back and thought about what to do next. I could have gone to the police right away, but something in me said to wait. I wanted him to feel safe first. I wanted him to think he'd gotten away with it. I knew his type: young, careless, always bragging before the dust settles. So I waited. I fixed my porch, trimmed the yard, did my chores like nothing was wrong. Every day I checked my phone for new activity, but there was none. The account stayed empty, but my patience grew stronger. People underestimate how dangerous silence can be. It makes others careless. He thought my silence meant weakness, but it was calculation. I wasn't planning revenge out of spite. I was planning it out of principle. He needed to learn that no matter how young or smart he thought he was, experience wins every time. By the end of the week, I knew exactly what to do. I had the documents, the proof, and the will. He had taken what was mine. Now I was going to take back what was his. I didn't know how long it would take, but I didn't care. I had waited for years to retire. I could wait a little longer to make this right. Days turned into weeks, and I didn't hear a single word from him. Not a text, not a call, not even a message to ask how I was. That silence told me everything I needed to know. He thought it was over. He thought I would just sit there and accept what he had done, too old and too tired to fight back. I didn't chase him. I didn't beg for answers. I spent my days exactly the same way I always had, watering the yard in the morning, reading the newspaper, keeping my routine steady. On the outside, I looked calm. On the inside, I was counting every passing day like a clock ticking toward his downfall. After 2 weeks, I started hearing stories. Friends in Texas called me and mentioned that they'd seen him around. He was out there showing off, eating at expensive restaurants, wearing new clothes, driving a different car. He was telling everyone about his investment success, saying he was building a company that his granddad had helped him get started. Those words burned when I heard them. He was parading around with my life savings like it was his trophy, but I didn't let anger cloud my mind. I'd already made my plan, and the time for action was coming soon. I spent my evenings reviewing everything again: the bank statements, the emails, the copies I'd made of every transfer. I even created a small file with all his information, printed and organized neatly. It wasn't revenge I was chasing, it was justice. I wanted to do this the right way: smart, legal, clean. I started making calls to a financial investigator who used to handle fraud cases in town. I didn't tell him all the details at first. I just asked how long it takes to recover stolen funds if the person responsible used a family member's name. He explained that if the paper trail was clear, the process was simple. Once the documents are filed, the money could be frozen and reclaimed. That was exactly what I needed to hear. But I didn't move yet. I wanted him to believe he had won. I wanted him to relax, spend freely, and expose every part of his so-called business. Because when pride grows too big, it becomes a trap. He was digging his own hole. All I had to do was wait. One evening, while sitting on my porch, I saw an online post from him. A picture of him standing in front of a car with a caption about living free. The car was expensive, a model I knew he could never afford without that money. I looked closely at the photo. Behind him was a sign, a local business name. I recognized it immediately. He wasn't in Texas anymore. He had moved just across the border into southern Oklahoma, only a few hours away. He was closer than he thought. That small detail gave me everything I needed. The next day, I called the investigator again and told him the truth. Every detail, every transaction, every document. I explained who he was, how he got the money, and how much he took. The man on the phone said he'd seen dozens of cases like this, family stealing from family, but he sounded impressed when I told him I'd gathered all the evidence myself. He said the case would be straightforward, that once the process started, my grandson wouldn't even know what hit him until it was too late. So I waited a little longer, watching quietly from a distance as his confidence grew. Friends told me he'd started renting a small office, claiming to run an investment company. He even hired people. He didn't know that every one of his business accounts was funded by the same stolen money that could now be traced. I didn't need to lift a finger. Time and truth were already working for me. Every night, before going to bed, I'd look at the folders sitting on my table. Inside, it was everything I needed to end his little empire. I wasn't angry anymore. I was patient. Because I knew something he didn't. The same patience that built my life would now dismantle his. Everything started shifting after the third week. My phone buzzed one morning with a call from the financial investigator. His voice was steady as he said the words I'd been waiting for. "We've traced every dollar." The money trail was crystal clear. His accounts, his business license, his fake company name, all tied directly back to the funds he stole from mine. He had opened multiple investment profiles under my information, but every withdrawal, every transaction, carried his fingerprint. The investigator explained that the process to freeze his assets had already begun. I thanked him quietly and hung up. I didn't smile, didn't celebrate. I just stood there by the window, staring out at the road, letting the silence do its work. The next few days were calm. Too calm. He still hadn't contacted me, but I could feel the storm coming. I knew the moment he started losing control of his accounts, he'd realize something was wrong. The calls would come, the excuses, the begging. I'd seen it all before with people who thought they were untouchable. Experience teaches you that panic doesn't start with shouting, it starts with silence. So I waited. 3 days later, the calls began. Unknown numbers at first, then his number. I didn't pick up. I wanted him to sit in that panic, to feel the weight of every lie he told. I pictured him checking his phone, refreshing his bank app, calling his so-called investors, realizing everything he bragged about was slipping away. Every car payment, every lease, every business expense, frozen. The investigator told me his accounts had been locked pending review. The irony was almost poetic. The same system he used to take from me was now taking everything from him. Still, I didn't tell anyone. I went about my days like normal. Grocery runs, fixing the mailbox, feeding the stray cats that wandered onto the porch. Patience had become my greatest weapon. The news would spread soon enough, and it did. Within a week, a neighbor called me and said, "Isn't that your grandson on the local news?" I turned on the TV. There it was, his company name listed in an article about fraudulent investment activity under investigation. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. I just nodded once and turned the TV off. He had built his empire on my foundation, and when I took it back, the entire thing collapsed. I heard through the grapevine that his employees hadn't been paid. His office was empty, his car got repossessed. The same people who praised him a month earlier were now deleting his photos, pretending they never knew him. He had spent so long pretending to be a businessman that he forgot the first rule of real work: you earn it. I never needed to lift a finger after that. The system handled everything for me. The investigator called again later that week and said the recovery process was nearly done. Most of my funds were already being returned to my account. The rest would take time, but it was safe. I thanked him again. He asked if I wanted to press charges. I told him no. Watching him lose everything was punishment enough. That night, I sat on my porch under the porch light, sipping coffee, the Oklahoma wind soft against my face. I thought about how he must have felt, watching his world disappear, wondering how an old man managed to outsmart him without saying a word. That thought didn't make me happy, it just made me quiet. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted understanding. And he was finally learning it the hard way. He thought he was clever, that youth and confidence could beat age and patience. But he forgot one thing. You can't con someone who's already lived through 100 storms. I didn't take his life away. I simply handed him the truth he'd been running from. Everything he had was never really his. It all came from me. And now, it was back where it belonged. It was late on a Thursday night when I heard the sound of a car pull up outside my house. The engine stayed running for a few seconds before cutting off. Then came the sound of hurried footsteps on the porch. I didn't move at first. I already knew who it was. The knock came hard. 3 fast hits on the door, each one louder than the last. I stood up slowly, picked up my cane, and walked to the door without turning on the porch light. I could see his shadow through the window, pacing back and forth, restless, desperate. When I opened the door, he looked nothing like the confident man who had driven away weeks earlier. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, his clothes wrinkled. He had the look of someone who hadn't slept in days. He didn't even say hello. He just stood there breathing heavy, his hands twitching like he was holding in panic. I didn't ask him to come in. He stepped inside anyway, walking straight to the living room like he still owned the place. He started pacing, rubbing his head, muttering under his breath, trying to form words that wouldn't come out. I stayed silent, letting him spin in his own noise. The calm in my chest felt strange, not cold, not angry, just steady. After a few minutes, he stopped pacing and turned toward me. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The truth was already in his eyes. He had lost everything. The business, the car, the fake friends. Everything built on lies had fallen apart. His voice finally broke the silence, low and unsteady. He said things I didn't respond to. Things about being sorry, about fixing it, about not meaning to hurt me. But none of it mattered anymore. Words don't fix what greed destroys. He started to cry, not the kind that comes from guilt, but the kind that comes from fear. The silence between us grew heavy. I could hear the ticking clock again. I walked past him slowly and sat down on the old armchair, the same one he used to curl up beside as a child when we watched baseball together. I didn't look at him. I just stared at the floor. He kept talking, pacing, hands shaking. He said something about how his accounts were frozen, how people were calling him a fraud, how he was finished. I didn't say a word. Eventually, he ran out of things to say. The room fell quiet again. That's when I stood up. My knees ached, but my voice was clear. I told him the truth in the simplest way possible. Not to humiliate him, not to hurt him, but to make him understand. I told him that when you steal from someone who built their life with hard work, you're not just stealing money. You're stealing years, sacrifices, mornings, and nights. You're stealing trust, and that's one debt no one ever pays back. He looked at me like a child again, the same fear in his eyes I saw when he used to break something as a boy. But this time, I didn't comfort him. I just walked to the door, opened it, and waited. The message was clear. He didn't belong here anymore. He walked out slowly, head low, without saying another word. The sound of his footsteps faded into the night. I closed the door and locked it quietly. When I went back to my chair, the air felt still again. The house was mine, the peace was mine, and the lesson was his. I didn't need to raise my voice or make threats. He had already lost more than I ever could take. And in that moment, I understood something deeper. Revenge doesn't always come from anger. Sometimes it comes from dignity. That night, I slept without fear, without guilt, and without regret. The storm had passed. I didn't destroy him. I just let him face the truth. He built his fall all by himself. I only made sure he saw it. The days after that night were quiet. Too quiet for him, not for me. Word spread fast in our small town, and by the end of the week, everyone knew what had happened. His business was gone. His office lease had been terminated, his car repossessed, his so-called partners nowhere to be found. The people who once shook his hand in bars now crossed the street to avoid him. He had built his name on borrowed pride, and when the truth surfaced, the ground beneath him collapsed. He stopped posting online. The photos, the fancy talk, the quotes about success, all gone overnight. The silence that followed was the sound of his fall. I heard from a friend that he tried to start over in another city. He called a few people, tried to borrow money, said he had a new plan. But no one trusted him anymore. His reputation followed him like a shadow. You can recover from failure, but you can't recover from being caught stealing from the one person who gave you everything. He tried to blame me at first. He told people I overreacted, that I ruined his dream. But lies don't travel far when the truth is written in paper trails and court documents. Nobody believed him. He had burned every bridge that mattered. His friends moved on. His investors disappeared. Even his parents stopped defending him. He was on his own, standing in the ashes of everything he built from my money. I didn't celebrate. I didn't brag. I didn't even tell anyone my side of the story. The truth didn't need a microphone. It stood tall on its own. I had lived long enough to know that time handles revenge better than any person can. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. His handwriting on the envelope. It wasn't long. Just a few lines about starting over and asking for forgiveness. There was no anger in it, no manipulation, just defeat. I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. Not to hold a grudge, but to remember the lesson. Because it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about what happens when a man forgets his roots. The bank confirmed that most of my funds had been restored. The rest was on its way back through the legal process. The investigator called to say the case was officially closed. Everything was clean, documented, and final. I thanked him and hung up. I sat at the same kitchen table where all this started, staring at the sunlight coming through the window, feeling something I hadn't felt in a while. Peace. Not happiness, not relief, just quiet peace. I didn't hate him. I didn't wish him harm. I just wished he had remembered where he came from. I had taught him about honesty, about pride in real work, about earning instead of taking. But greed is a louder teacher. It blinds people until they destroy everything good around them. He had to learn the hard way, the same way I learned that age doesn't mean weakness. It means patience. It means knowing when to speak and when to let silence do the work. People in town started coming to me, saying I'd done the right thing. But I didn't see it as right or wrong. I saw it as fair. You can forgive a mistake, but not a choice made with full awareness. He chose greed. I chose consequence. As for me, life went back to normal. I tended my garden, fixed the fence, and drank coffee on the porch each morning. The world moved on, and so did I. But deep down, I knew he'd never forget. Every time he tried to build something again, he'd remember the day he lost it all. Not because of a stranger, not because of bad luck, but because of the man he thought was too old to matter. The seasons changed, and with them, my days found a quiet rhythm again. Mornings started the same way. A pot of coffee, the sound of birds in the yard, the slow hum of Oklahoma wind through the trees. I didn't think much about what happened anymore, but every now and then, something small would remind me. A bank envelope in the mail, a truck that looked like his, a phone ring that came too late in the evening. Each reminder carried a sting, but not pain, just memory. The kind that sits quietly inside you and never quite leaves. I began to see the whole thing differently. The money had hurt to lose, yes, but what truly broke me at first wasn't the loss of dollars. It was realizing how blind love can make a person. When you're a grandfather, you see the best in your family. You look at them and think they carry your values, your lessons, your blood. You never imagine they'd use those things against you. I had spent my life giving him chances, rides to school, money for books, advice when he failed jobs. I thought I was helping him grow. But maybe I was just helping him skip the lessons life was meant to teach him. The weeks rolled by, and slowly, the house began to feel peaceful again. I cleaned out the clutter, fixed the squeaky gate, painted the porch rails. My savings came back, piece by piece, until I had enough to live comfortably again. I didn't need much, just food, quiet, and time. Some neighbors still mentioned him when they stopped by, but I didn't say much. I didn't badmouth him. I just said he was learning. That was true. Every man learns one way or another, some from wisdom, others from loss. He had chosen loss. Sometimes he called. The first few times, I didn't answer. Then one day, I picked up. His voice was low, softer than I'd ever heard it. He didn't ask for money. He just said he was trying to start over somewhere in Arkansas or maybe Tennessee, working odd jobs, saving little by little. There was no pride in his tone, only truth. I told him to keep going. I told him to build something honest this time. No shortcuts, no borrowed names. He said he would. Then he thanked me and hung up. The line went quiet, but for once, it didn't feel like goodbye. That night, I sat outside watching the sunset drop behind the hills. The sky turned deep orange, then dark purple, then quiet gray. I thought about everything that happened. The betrayal, the silence, the revenge, the peace that followed. It all felt far away now, like a story that happened to someone else. Maybe it needed to happen. Maybe he needed to fall that low to find his way back up. Maybe I needed it too. To remind myself that kindness needs boundaries. I wasn't bitter anymore. I'd forgiven him, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means understanding. I understood that greed can twist anyone, that desperation can make family strangers, and that strength doesn't always come from shouting or fighting. Sometimes it comes from doing nothing, from letting time handle what your hands no longer need to. The porch light flickered softly as I finished my coffee. The yard was quiet, the air still. For the first time in a long while, I felt light. Not proud, not angry, just free. I had done what I needed to do. The lesson had been taught, not through rage, but through consequence. He took my account and tried to turn it into his future. I took his mistake and turned it into his education. I went inside, locked the door, and turned off the lights. As I walked down the hall, I passed by the old photo of him as a boy, holding that small fish at Lake Texoma. I stopped for a second and smiled. Maybe one day, he'll remember the man who taught him to fish, and not the one who made him lose everything to learn how to live again. He used my account thinking he could buy a future that wasn't his. I used patience, truth, and time to turn it into his worst nightmare. It wasn't fast, it wasn't loud, it was quiet, steady, and absolute. He lost everything the same way he took it, silently, one click at a time. In the end, I didn't just get my money back. I got something more valuable, proof that wisdom still beats arrogance. When I was younger, I thought revenge meant payback. Now I know it means peace. Peace that comes when the truth stands tall on its own and doesn't need a single word to be believed. I never told anyone what I did. I didn't need to. People like him always reveal themselves eventually. His story became a warning in town, not because I told it, but because others did. Folks started saying he was the one who messed with his grandfather's account and lost everything. Some even added details that weren't true, but I didn't correct them. Every version ended the same way, with him broke and me still standing. That was enough. Sometimes when I sit on the porch at night, I think about how easily it could have ended differently. I could have yelled, fought, made a scene. But life has taught me that anger fades while patience builds. The best kind of justice doesn't destroy. It teaches. I didn't ruin him. I made him see what he had become. And maybe one day, when he's older and the pride burns out of him, he'll understand what I was really trying to show him, that taking from others only leaves you empty in the end. I still remember his face that night on the porch, the moment he realized the old man he thought was weak had outsmarted him without ever raising his voice. There was no joy in that moment, only truth. You can't cheat someone who's already lived through struggle. You can't fool someone who's spent decades watching people come and go, learning what real value looks like. I wasn't smarter than him, just steadier. I didn't react. I endured. And endurance will always outlast deception. Now my days are simple again. I wake early, tend the garden, feed the birds, and rest easy knowing my house and my name are still mine. The bank account is full again, but I don't check it often. Money comes and goes. What stays is the lesson, the one he paid for. Sometimes he still calls, his voice quiet, saying he's finding honest work. I don't hold grudges. I tell him to keep going, to build slowly, to earn what he wants instead of taking it. Maybe that's forgiveness. Maybe it's just age. Either way, it's peace. In America, the roads are long and winding. They teach you things the hard way. No matter how far someone runs, those roads have a way of turning back toward the people they betrayed. He learned that lesson. So did I. The world doesn't always give second chances, but life always gives reminders, and every reminder has a cost. He used my name, my trust, and my account to chase wealth. I used his greed to teach him humility. We both got what we deserved. I got my peace. He got his truth. And somewhere out there, I hope he's finally learning what I tried to show him all those years ago. That real success isn't about what you take. It's about what you can live with when the taking is done.